Hi, my name is Glen Davis. I work with Chi Alpha at Stanford University. Thanks for letting me spend some time with you today. Is the Bible trustworthy? Is the Bible a book from God? And if it was, how could we tell? These are questions that every thinking Christian has to grapple with, and questions that many skeptics are quite animated by. Let me start by identifying some red herrings, that places where I'm not going to go today for the sake of time. I think there are good conversations to be had, but I think that even if we answer all the questions I'm about to enumerate well, we still won't get where we need to get. So the most common objections to the Bible being from God are something like this. The Bible contains error. For example, let's say it says the value of pi is 19, or it says that Julius Caesar was an Egyptian warlord. That's error in the Bible. That would disqualify it as being a trustworthy book. Or the Bible is internally inconsistent, that in one chapter it says that Jesus is God, and in another chapter it says Jesus is not God. Then that is internally inconsistent. It contradicts itself. Or maybe that the Bible has been changed over time, that what we have now has been altered by some sort of conspiracy through the ages, and what was written back in the first century is actually quite different than what we have today. The idea behind the Da Vinci Code or some of these other pop culture criticisms of the Bible. Or that the Bible is just irrelevant, that it's just stupid and useless, and it talks about shellfish and different types of fabric, and it's got nothing to do with the modern world. Well, let's say I could address every one of those objections and answer them to your satisfaction. And I actually think that I could. But let's say that I succeed. What then? I've shown you the Bible is free from internal contradiction. I've shown you it's free from error, that it's been accurately transmitted over time, and that it's relevant. But, it's a copy of Robert's Rules of Order. As far as I know, it's got no error or internal contradiction. It's been accurately reproduced and transmitted, and in the right situation is extremely relevant. But it's not from God. It's just a reliable document, and that's useful, and the Bible has to at least be that. But to get to the question of, is it from God, we have to talk about something completely different. If this book bears divine fingerprints upon it, then we have to find the right way to analyze the question. So I would submit the best question that we can start with is, does the Bible reveal something that only God could know? Does it show evidence of having been produced by an omniscient divine author? Well, what's something only God can know? I think most people's first thought is the future. If the Bible foretells the future accurately, then we can trust it, or at least it's more likely we can trust it. The problem, of course, is we don't know the future either. So anything about the far future, like the end of the world, we can't tell if the Bible's telling the truth or not. It has to be something that was future from the perspective of the Bible, that is past from the perspective of us today. Now, there's a lot of stuff like that. For example, back in the year 580 BC or thereabouts, the prophet Ezekiel foretold the fall of Tyre, the city. And that happened not until 332 BC. So that's actually really cool. But honestly, that's over 2,000 years ago. Objectively, yeah. That's like 250-year gap. That's like someone in 1776 in the Revolutionary War accurately describing the events of September 11, 2001, when the planes hit the World Trade Center and that the terrorist attacks occurred. That's impressive when we catch our attention, but because it's so far ago, maybe. But what do you know about Alexander the Great or the kingdom of Nebuchadnezzar? Or because you're not an ancient historian, you don't know whether to trust what I'm saying or not. You'll either choose to believe me or not, depending on whether you like me or not, but that's not really evidence to you in the way that you would hope. What we need is a biblical prophecy that came to pass somewhat recently, and in such a gap of years that there's just no denying God was at work. Fortunately, there's a really simple illustration. The reestablishment of Israel as a nation in 1948. This was clearly foretold in the Bible, in significant detail, and came to pass as it was predicted. And this happened within the lifetime of people that you know. Possibly your parents, almost certainly your grandparents. For the sake of time, I'll just give you two passages. Isaiah 66, verses 7 and 8. Isaiah says, "Before she goes into labor, she gives birth. Before the pains come upon her, she delivers a son. Who has ever heard of such things? Who has ever seen things like this? Can a country be born in a day, or a nation be brought forth in a moment? Yet no sooner is Zion in labor than she gives birth to her children." And then Ezekiel chapter 11, verse 17. Therefore say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I will gather you from the nations and bring you back from the countries where you have been scattered. I will give you back the land of Israel again. Notice the details in just these two brief prophecies that says the nation will be born in a day and that the birth will come before the labor pains. Israel was founded in peace in one day and it has had trouble ever since. The Jewish people were without a self-governed homeland for over 2,600 years, and yet God restored them. There is no equivalent in human history. Now, if I mention this to a skeptic, their first reply is usually something like this. Yeah, well, the people who were making those decisions, the leaders of the different nations, they knew the Bible. They were trying to fulfill it. Okay, I understand why that makes sense to you, but I don't think you've thought deeply about it. Think about when we're talking about the aftermath of World War II. The setup for this was not the machinations of devout Christians trying to bring about the legitimacy of the Jewish people. It was Adolf Hitler trying to destroy the Jewish people. Was he really trying to legitimize Judaism? I think not. Or the Islamic nations that have gone to war against Israel, causing the birth pains that are talked about in this were they somehow trying to validate the Old Testament? Far from it. Far from it. And let's say that someone like Winston Churchill or one of the other world leaders had in their mind that they were going to try to validate the Bible by creating a nation. I want you to imagine, let's say you're in that role. What are you going to do? How are you going to go about doing that? Today we are facing global challenges, a pandemic, and we can't get international cooperation on how to handle this thing. We can't even agree upon things like tariffs and trade policy. Do you really think you'd be able to engineer on your own the creation of a nation and give it international legitimacy? That's crazy talk. The only way Israel came to be is because God was involved. I want you to imagine try and find just in your mind any other ancient people who've been dispossessed from their homeland, a homeland that they claim was given to them by God himself. Find me a people who has maintained their self-identity and awareness over thousands of years. And they had prophecies written in the public record, scattered around the world that anyone could access, maintaining their claim that they would be restored to that nation in a specific way. Allow that story to become globally relevant and known in every corner of the earth. I don't believe any such people exist. And yet that is the story of the Jewish people, and they are the only ones who've had their homeland restored in fulfillment with the prophecy. Now, I think that is one really good reason to give the Bible a close look, to give it your undivided attention. I think there's actually an even better one that's not connected to prophecy, but connected to your daily life. In John chapter 7, verses 16 and 17, Jesus said this, "My teaching is not my own. It comes from the one who sent me. If anyone chooses to do God's will, he will find out whether my teaching comes from God or whether I speak on my own." At the end of the day, it's nice to know the Bible foretells the future in some global sense. But what matters for most of us is our day-to-day lives. And the Bible speaks to that practically. And Jesus says, do you want to know if my teaching is from God or not? Do you want to know if I'm from God or not? Try and do what I say. Just try and live according to my teachings, and you will discover whether they're from God or not. And this makes sense. If I give you directions, you'll know whether I'm telling you the truth or not if you start getting to where you're supposed to go. If I am your chemistry professor and I tell you how to do a certain experiment and you follow my instructions, it works out, that shows you I'm a chemistry expert. If you follow my instructions, there's an explosion, then I don't know what I'm talking about. If Jesus shows us how to build a life and we build a life and it works, that's evidence. And so I would encourage you today, if you're not sure how much you trust the Bible, sure, you can dig into all the other stuff I talked about, the allegations of errors and the internal contradictions and all that stuff, and there's answers online for all that. You can look at fulfilled prophecies in the nation of Israel. End of the day, try and live your life. And look at your life in light of the teachings of Jesus. And I think you will discover that he is trustworthy. And if he is trustworthy, the word he gave us is trustworthy. So I encourage you today, trust the Bible. And even more than the Bible, trust the one who inspired it. God bless.